Welcome to our Living Stones podcast, where we gather to discuss all matters of faith and life as members of God's household. In a world that often leaves us feeling fragmented and disconnected, our hope is that Living Stones will help to further connect us as we pursue the Lord together. I'm your host, Siyoung, and in today's podcast, we'll be addressing Game of Thrones and what Christians watch. And I have here with me Pastor Paul, Pastor Jacob, and Andrew. And thank you guys for joining us in the discussion today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh,
Good to be
where's the energy, guys? I know it's Sunday, but come on now. All right. Well, I guess maybe this will help us perk up a little bit. I want to start with the icebreaker question. Given we're talking about what we watch, right, and the importance of it, kind of want to, ask up front, what is your favorite movie or TV show? Maybe like of all time. Right? Do you guys have one that like comes, off the top of your head?
Well, Netflix recently released what has been a favorite show of mine in childhood, called Home Improvement with Tim Allen.
Whoa.
Wow.
So that's on Netflix right now. So I've been rewatching those
Unexpected
episodes.
answer.
That is quite...
With Thea. She loves it. She loves the
Really?
Tim the Toolman grunt.
Wow. It's been a minute since I watched that.
Yeah. Wow. Blast from the past.
How about you guys?
I mean, let's see. I like the sort of the Braveheart type of movies, so I would put that on one of my favorite movies. Shawshank Redemption comes to mind. The Incredibles. It's the first Pixar movie I watched. I was kind of blown away. And TV shows. That's a harder question, I think. But when I was younger, I enjoyed watching Wonder Years. Is that what it's called? Wonder Years? You guys remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was it.
Fred Savage.
Kind of captured me at the time. Seinfeld later on. It was a fun show to watch. I'm sure there are other shows, but yeah, those two come to mind.
How about you, Andrew?
I have a few shows, I think, similar with Pastor Paul, hard to nail down, but I used to like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air a lot. I watched that.
Younger generation. That's probably my younger brother's favorite.
Oh, yeah. I also liked a lot of the older ones, too. Actually, I like The Cosby Show.
Good one.
Very wholesome stuff. And in terms of movies, my favorite movie of all time has always been Remember the Titans. I always liked like men in struggle, working it out, the camaraderie of coming together for the same goal. But then more recently, seeing Top Gun Maverick, that's been, those two have been interchanged. So yeah.
We drove home 80 miles per hour after watching the movie.
Yeah, I did.
The adrenaline rush.
The 2 or 3 times I saw it in theaters, I did. And I realized recently I like the genre where it's like buddy cop genre. So like Rush Hour, those
Rush
ones.
Hour.
So yeah.
You love Rush Hour?
I do.
Okay, I thought it was lame, but
Rush Hour.
Oh really? Oh no.
See, first is Dune, now it's Rush Hour. We just cannot see eye to eye
just
on
wait
this.
until they remake Rush Hour with Timothy Chalamet and
Oh no. I can't
Please
even
don't
imagine
do
that.
that. Please don't do that.
Oh no.
oh no, I'm sorry, I meant Lethal Weapon.
I tried to
Lethal
block
Weapon
out.
with
I
Timothy
tried to block
Chalamet
out
and-
Doom, but now that you mention it again, I feel triggered.
Yeah, well, so Dune type movies are my favorite, sci-fi.
Okay.
So I like a lot of Christopher Nolan movies, like Inception or Interstellar.
Dark.
I just like it when directors create their own world and you kind of just get immersed into what they created. And so it also has a lot to do with cinematography
So
too.
Lord of the Rings. I forgot to mention Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
Great movie. Movies.
Star Wars, I guess. The New World. Okay.
Yeah.
You-
Yeah.
you
Typically,
mean
I choose any of those above
New
Dune.
New Hope. New Hope.
No, I'm saying Star Wars.
It's a new world.
They created
New world.
Oh, I
a
see.
whole new world, new characters, right? I mean, those far better than Dune. Yes.
All right.
Far better.
Far better. All right. But anyway, yeah. In terms of TV shows, my all-time favorite is The Simpsons. I just watched that as soon as I landed in America, and I watched it for like 10 plus years, and like every day in Chicago at 5:30 p.m. It would come on, and then followed by Seinfeld. That's when I turned it off.
Oh no.
Yeah,
That was my
it's
routine.
Very, very different upbringing, but
Yeah.
Simpsons like one of the shows they tell my kids never to watch. It's bad influence.
No, I would say that's the greatest content.
Yeah.
That's what happens when your parents are away working, just watching whatever.
No supervision.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for sharing. So, obviously this is an important enough topic for us to kind of bring up and talk about. So, like for you guys, why do you think this topic of what we watch is relevant for us as Christians? Why is it important enough that we should be talking about it? And especially, we called out Game of Thrones, and it's in the title, right? So, what's the deal? What's so important about this?
The principle that I like to really hold on to when it comes to any matter of practice in living is what would it look like for Jesus to reign over this? And so, does Jesus reign even in what we consume, the things that we watch, the things that we listen to, even in, we can say even in the things that we eat and drink? Can we confidently say, I'm partaking, I'm enjoying, and Christ is reigning over this, over me, as I'm consuming this? And so we think of certain shows like Game of Thrones, and these are shows that are typically filled with intense violence, gore, and sexual immorality that's depicted in it. And so it's just the question of, is it really worthwhile consuming such things? Does it actually do something to you? Which I personally think it does, as you constantly consume such things. Can you really have any good conversations that would benefit one another as you talk about these episodes? And what I think movies and TV shows are good at, and what they can do if they're really good at doing it, is it really gives you a good commentary about the world that you live in, but also at the same time it could give you a certain level of inspiration, or just the necessity of Jesus, based on how these characters and stories are portrayed in film and TV shows. Unfortunately, I find that a lot of the stuff that's out there in the silver screen or our home, they're not very beneficial. They are certainly entertaining. They are popular and discussed amongst friends in our culture, widely consumed, and yet it has not been profitable.
So, part of what you were saying is that, movies, TV shows, or, the whole aspect of arts and motion pictures, they're not bad in and of itself, right? As I think you mentioned, there's commentary, and you talked about inspiration. So there's good things to glean. Can we kind of expand on that a little bit and maybe talk about like how we should view art as Christians, kind of expand on what you were saying? Because we're saying that it's not a bad thing, right? And it could be a good thing. And so I don't know if you guys had any thoughts about how we as Christians can appreciate, or why we can appreciate the arts. And
I think what's helpful with what PJ said with trying to think of how Christ reigns over certain things. I honestly don't think I gave that enough thought in my earlier years of faith, like what I consumed and how it would benefit. But now as I see it, it's definitely it affects your subconscious. And one point I think I wanted to hone on in terms of what he said is like it does inspire you towards certain actions, towards certain thoughts. And there have been like films like the ones that like I listed in terms of like favorites, where it did inspire me to do things that I normally wouldn't have thought of. Well, like I guess we can use a recent example. So recently there has been this craze over this Korean drama called When Life Gives You Tangerines. I don't want to give too much away, but one thing that I do appreciate about it, it's not like perfect, but it does comment on family. And you can relate to a lot of the things, especially if you are like Korean, to the immigrant life, the struggle, and also just appreciating and seeing through a certain lens what your parents and their generation has gone through. And so I saw the benefit of that and understood my parents more in a lens I previously would not have. Like, for instance, like they can tell me about things that they've gone through in their life, like one on one, but I can't really put myself in that situation. But seeing it in through like a lens of a drama, I'm like, oh, okay, I can actually, in a way, sort of experience what they did and see that they are actually not really different from me, but they've just been born in a different time. And so seeing a benefit in that way, I think that's, that's how media can serve, or the arts can serve as, helping to sort of help us understand certain things like that. Yeah, I mean, you could put in any example.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what else I could share.
For sure. Yeah. And I think that's a good point because, I was kind of thinking about it, and I think the fact that we can appreciate art and beauty, I think reflects the reality of the Imago Dei, right? Like the fact that we are created in the image of God, right? And so there is this longing for beauty. There's this innate appreciation and longing for belonging somewhere, right? Even like bravery and heroism and things that move us, right? I think that really speaks to some of the, inner qualities that God has sort of given to us. He has sort of written in mankind, and that really speaks to us and appeals to us. And we look for beauty wherever we go, right? And we look for a sense of belonging and like bravery and all these kinds of things that it really strikes a chord with us. And so, arts is one of the things that I think I personally, think can be enjoyed with like whether you're a believer or non-believer.
Sure.
I think our motive and end goal is absolutely different, right? But in God's sort of common grace, I think this is something that humanity can enjoy. Art is something that's open and available to everyone, right? And God sort of blesses mankind with that kind of gift, in a sense, the ability to appreciate that. And so I just kind of thought of that as you were talking. Pastor Paul, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, I'm glad you brought it up. I think it's important for us to make it clear that God is the first artist, right? He created all things in a beautiful way. And so that kind of ties into your what you mentioned about the Imago Dei. We bear God's image. So why do we long for such beauty? Well, because God is the ultimate artist. Because He is beautiful, right? If you want to know what beauty is, well, He's absolute beauty, right? And everything else is meant to be a reflection of that. And so I think whether it's music, or movies, film, let's see, talk about TV shows, anything that is attempting to express something true about life. Maybe it could be put this way: like whenever we as people attempt to echo God's overarching redemptive narrative, right, in a faithful manner, I think that's when art is most beautiful, right? Where we can not glamorize sin, right, but actually depict sin for what it is, and depict bravery for what it is, as good virtue, right? That's when we're at our best and faithfully reflecting God. But when we try to distort things and you mentioned earlier, you appreciate people who kind of recreate their own world. Well, I mean, I think if they do it well, great. But if it's distorting what is actually beautiful, what is true, then I think that's where it becomes bad art, right? And something we shouldn't delight in. And so that's where I sort of draw the boundaries when I'm seeking to appreciate music or film, TV shows, whatever. Whenever an artist seeks to glamorize something that is meant to be considered sinful or evil, that's where I say no. That's not good. And we try to teach our children as well to watch things with discernment, right? And not to simply blindly accept everything as good and true.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads us to this next question in relation to what you just said. So art in and of itself can be a good thing. It's a reflection of God's beauty and sort of reflects our inner longing to seek that beauty, which is ultimately found in God. So while we can appreciate good and beautiful things, what might be considered art that is just perverse? What is art that is indeed distorted? Like some things that we see in this world, in our culture, in our day and age. Obviously we bring up Game of Thrones because that's a good example of art that's gone perverse. That's sort of been perverted in a lot of different ways.
I think there's definitely a line of wisdom for certain things. There are things that are, particularly when it's produced in the States, they tend to be a little more violent. When they're produced overseas, they tend to be a little more erotic. And it's hard to say you need to not consume every single thing that comes from one country or another. There's perhaps certain level of wisdom that we need to have to understand what we're watching and to also recognize what are things that we shouldn't be watching. Clearly, there are things that are black and white, like things that are pornographic. Some people might consider that art or film. We know that's just perverse and there's nothing more than that. So it's hard to say exactly what it is that is perversion, but it's one of those things when you see it, like you probably know something's wrong with this. So in terms of wisdom, I'm assuming most of the people who are listening to this, when they watch something, they know this is not something that they should be watching in the open. If Jesus was literally standing next to them by their shoulder, they know that they would shut their laptop down or change to a different channel. People don't watch channels anymore. Different, app or something.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to make this comment so that people don't misunderstand us, or at least me. I'm not against nudity portrayed in some way. I think there might be an appropriate expression, like depending on the context, depending on what kind of movie you're trying to make. Let's say what comes to mind is like Schindler's List, right?
I was thinking of that. Yeah.
When you're trying to portray the horrors, right, of that era, I think and maybe I'm not saying they did it well. I forget the exact scene, but I know that there was nudity in it. But I think in that context, some nudity is appropriate, right? So that kind of expression wasn't meant to be erotic, right, or gratuitous in any way, right? It wasn't meant to arouse people or the viewers. But and for the record, I haven't watched Game of Thrones. I did, out of curiosity, watch like a few minutes to kind of see what kind of thing we're talking about, or what kind of thing we're expected to talk about. So I do know, just based on what I saw and also what people have been saying, that the purpose of nudity and sex in that art form is really to arouse, and it's to be we could define it as gratuitous sex, right? And also I believe there is a good element of just glamorizing sin in some way, and so I think it clearly kind of goes beyond what Jesus Jesus would consider as appropriate and good. Right. Again, I'm not saying that we as Christians should be absolutely against nudity in any form. Yeah.
So one principle that I'm at least hearing is, if whatever it is that you're watching is being depicted in a way that sort of is meant to arouse sinful temptations, and kind of like lead you to, in a way, like harbor in your heart lust. I think that's one principle. At least that's what I'm getting from you guys in terms of how to discern what's perverse, right? If it's leading you to,
and I think that's how
sinful
most people would know.
inclinations.
PJ mentioned earlier, like you know. I mean, most people know when they see it, because why? Because it arouses. Like it basically, they know what lust is. They know that they're lusting, especially men, right? We know when we're lusting. And, can't deny the fact that Jesus specifically addressed lust and say, even if you look at a woman lustfully, that's you're committing adultery, right? I mean, how much clearer can you be, right? I think the problem in our day is that because everyone does it virtually, right? Because it's such a common thing, we in our foolishness, we're tempted to move the goalpost, so to speak, and say, surely Jesus could not have meant this if everyone's actually doing it. No, I mean, the better response would be to say, no, it is what Jesus said. And so I should repent. We should repent and avoid such things, right? Instead of trying to justify your sinful behavior. And, as people, you can't deny the fact that, we are what we watch and what we consume in the end, right? I mean, we're limited, finite people. There's 24 hours a day. I mean, if you're not reflecting upon what is true and good, scripture being, of course, one, and, spending wholesome time thinking about, honorable things, then, you will get immersed in a sinful world and your mind will be corrupted. That's who we are. I mean, who do we think we are? I mean, we think we're going to be immune to the things we watch or see or listen to. Of course we're affected. We're such emotional beings. We're having a conversation earlier about EQ, right? I mean, I think the more emotional you are, the more susceptible you are as well, right, to these things. So I think we do have to be careful, draw the line. We don't want to be people trying to move the goalpost just because it's hard for us. So I mean, those things come to mind.
Yeah, that's good. So and I think these are very good insights and good rules and principles to sort of abide by. And that kind of leads me to ask, though, this question. Why is it so... it may be an obvious question, but I think it could be teased out in a way that's helpful for our listeners, just so we're clear on this, right? And I think this gets to the heart of why we are sort of talking about this topic in terms of watching, what to watch and what not to watch. And the question is, why is it important to watch what we're watching? Why is it important to be watchful of what we're watching, right?
I forgot to mention one thing, sorry. But I remember taking a class at a community college after I moved back from Korea. So this was like probably 1992. I took an econ class. The econ professor, I don't know if he's a professor, but he was the instructor. He it was a class of maybe a dozen people, and he would walk in the morning and say, "Oh yeah, man." I guess his routine in the morning was to watch porn. Right, he would share that with the class, but he's like, "Oh yeah, I mean, I'm old enough now. It's like watching the Flintstones for him." Right. In other words, he was desensitized. He was actually with the class. It was like really interesting that he would be so free about sharing these things. But he said it's like watching the Flintstones, right? And I think a lot of people have that cavalier attitude. When you talk to them, they think, "Oh, it's just Game of Thrones. It doesn't really affect me." they're saying the same thing. It's like watching the Flintstones, essentially, right? They're saying the same thing. They're essentially desensitized. And what I want to say that's not a good thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not a good thing to be desensitized when watching such things, such graphic things. It's a graphic sex, right? I think that's a sign that you have been corrupted in a way. And, I think God desires that we would guard our eyes, right? I was reminded of what Job said, right? I had this reference that I wanted to share. I have made a covenant with my eyes in Job 31, right? How then could I gaze lustfully at a young woman, right? That we need to kind of reclaim that attitude as believers and not be so cavalier as what we watch. So
Yeah. And I think that's, that ties into the question that I just asked. It's important to watch what we're watching precisely because we also get desensitized to the level of sexual immorality and even the violence. As we watch more, it's like we get numb to it and we need more of it in a way. And that's how, in some ways, pornography works, right? It's like, I think we talked about this before, but, your brain creates these like synapses and it's like you need more of it before you feel more satisfied and things like that.
Yeah, we're definitely affected. Which is it's no wonder why the entire culture continues to move the goalposts of any kind of sexual sin, because we've all been desensitized to a degree. It's like, so who cares what they do, basically, there's like no sense of remorse anymore,
But some people that watch Game of Thrones would argue that the storyline is amazing, right? There are a lot of like power dynamics, like a betrayal. It's like almost like biblical sort of betrayals and power balances and kings rising and falling.
I'm sure it's amazing.
Right. And so people would say, hey, I watch it because the story is really good. Like I don't really care for the sexual content, but it's really good. How would you guys respond to that?
Well, I would say if there are good stories of betrayal to the biblical proportion, then I would say, well, read the Bible. Just read the actual proportion and what it tries to mimic.
I knew it was going there.
No, but even with Game of Thrones, so I don't watch and I have not seen, but I've read articles on it, and I read and watch people who have watched it talk about it. So I know the story, right?
Okay.
Without having to watch
Wow.
it. I don't feel like I'm missing out because ultimately what you want is that good story. And so you can consume that story without consuming. Not to mention there are, I don't know if they're apps or programs or companies, it might be one and the same, where they actually filter out certain scenes of gratuitous violence and sexuality and leave out the things that is more important.
So is each episode like 5 minutes?
I don't know.
That's the problem, Would they really enjoy it if all those scenes were taken out? Is the question.
So I think that really shows, what do you really want? You say you're here for the story, but what do you really want? Would you still be satisfied if those things were removed? And I think with Game of Thrones specifically, it's hard to do because I don't know if the author is the one who coined the term or the people who are working on it coined the term. And I think the word is sexplanation, where the narrative is driven through the acts of sexual intimacy, right? And so that's Game of Thrones. They coined that. Okay. And so it's hard to say I'm here only for the story when the story is saying, well, one of the reasons why this is so good is because of what you're watching, because of what's happening here. So there lies that, issue. It's like, yeah, there might be good aspects of, or good, aspects of good storytelling here, but overall, when you really see it as a whole, is it really a beautiful picture that you want to consume? I think it's important to really be careful what we're watching, because I think what you're consuming, as was mentioned before, you are what you watch. I think it really shows where your treasure is. Jesus, when he talked about don't laying up treasure, things on earth, in Matthew 6, he talks about don't lay yourselves treasures on earth. And then in the end of it, he talks about how no one can serve two masters. And right between, he talks about how The eye is of the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be healthy. And it's in the context of what you're constantly looking at. It's really indicating what your treasure is. Right? It's indicating what your master is. And so if you're constantly looking at these things, you're really, again, going back to the principle, is Jesus reigning over you? Is he reigning over the things that you're consuming? Or is something else your God? Not to mention, when we talk about pornographic and erotic things, you are enabling an industry that has fueled and monetized human trafficking and exploitation of women who have been abused. Right? It's not a mistake that a lot of these so-called adult actors and actresses, particularly the women, had history of abuse in their lives. Right? And it fuels. Yeah, I mean, some of these things really are depictions of horror that may not be depicted in that way on film. Right? Assault, issues of assault, and you wouldn't know it, but you're actually fueling that. You're helping that type of business continue by constantly consuming these things. And so I think there needs to be a strike in our conscience. This is not just for your personal gratification. You are hurting a lot more people than you think you are when you consume these things. It may be free to you, but it comes at the scars and the blood of people, so many people before you.
Yeah, I think it's a good point when you are saying you are essentially, like, what you watch shows where your treasure is, or where your eyes are constantly set on shows where your treasure is. Because, it is true, like, what you watch has the power to rouse thoughts, right? It evokes emotions, right? And I think it even has the power to cause temptation. Like, you're literally tempted as you're watching people, in a way, like, even I haven't watched Game of Thrones, but, I could imagine sort of all the sexual, like, scenes that people talk about, right? If, like, in a way, now that I think about it, it's weird because you're essentially like a spectator of sex. Like, you're watching other people have sex, right? And I think what good can come from that, right? Only temptation and your own lustful inclinations being, like, awakened and being, like, set on fire because you're watching it, right? And so what you watch is important. And we talked, Pastor Paul mentioned desensitization, and I couple that with objectification, right? You start to objectify men and women.
You normalize it. I think that's what end up happening. People normalize. So what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Basically, when they say what's the big deal, that essentially, well, it's normal to them now, right?
Yeah, and they become objects of your sexual gratification, right? Like, they're no longer fellow image bearers, but they're objects that satiate, like, your lustful desires, right? And so not only when you're watching those things, but it starts to translate into real life, right? When you look at other women, or from women to men, you start to look at them with lustful intent, because your brain is just kind of, like, wired to view the opposite gender in such a way. And so I think that objectification and the desensitization it all happens as you're watching things, right? It all goes somewhere, right? It doesn't just disappear. It all kind of stacks up in your heart. And so I don't think it should be underestimated or undermined, the power of what we watch, right?
I think Kevin DeYoung a few years ago wrote an article basically asking Christians not to watch Game of Thrones specifically. And he actually cited Ephesians 5, verse 3, but among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity, right? So it's not just that we should avoid sexual immorality, but there shouldn't even be a hint. And so that's a high bar, right? And how can we abide by this verse while still watching such things? I think it's impossible.
What do you guys think about reading the Game of Thrones instead of watching? Because I know these are based on the books that the author wrote. is there a difference in consuming print to consuming these visual effects?
I think of all those romance novels that people read.
Well, I'm not sure what's in the book actually, so I can't comment on that. To be honest, I'm not sure how it's written.
Does it explain like the?
I have heard people
The
talk about
intercourses
the
and-
contrast of the two, and it seems like the book is just as
Explicit?
perverse
Oh,
and grotesque, if not more, than what's actually on the TV show.
Well, if it reads like an erotic novel, then there's a problem for sure. But again, I can't comment on that.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable because it was still. I would imagine it would still arouse those imaginations and.
To people who are so desensitized that they can't imagine it anymore. It's just words on the page.
I have a hard time believing that you would read such like descriptions and not be affected by it. Of course, I'm sure you're desensitized, but that's it's still like you're desensitized to things that arouse you, right? And so like I still think maybe the degree is different, but I still feel like I think it has similar effects. I don't think it's healthy. Yeah. Did you ask that because you had a thought on that, or?
No, I was just playing a little bit of devil's advocate.
I see. Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, maybe some people might respond or have questions in that way too. Well, if I don't consume the TV shows, can I at least consume it in literature?
Yeah, and that brings me to ask, like, music, right? We're not seeing anything; we're just listening, right? But there are lots of sexually explicit songs like that. That's description. What was that song that a couple years ago that blew up? Ben Shapiro was talking about it.
Well, you obviously can't sing it on the podcast.
No, I don't even know it. Was it WAP or something?
Oh.
Like that was a whole controversy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so like
Educate me. What's this?
can't talk about
Yeah.
that.
It's about
Can't talk about it, but but like even listening to those things, don't you guys feel like
Sure.
that arouses certain like
yeah.
temptations or
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, music is very powerful. Yeah.
right? It moves you and it has a way of like clinging to your heart because it's so catchy, right? And so I think the way that like it talks about men or women or what they're doing, I think that it does stick. And yeah, I don't know if you guys had any special thought about that. Like, do you guys agree that?
Oh, absolutely. I think music absolutely impacts how we feel. We typically tend to gravitate toward a certain type of song depending on how we feel, or certain songs actually change how we feel. I think there's a reason why God commands his people to sing songs of praise, and the Psalms are filled with praise, even though they're laments, because as we praise God, there's a shift in our emotion as well as our thinking. And so I think songs have a powerful way of doing it. I think there's a reason why certain people groups gravitate toward particular genres, because it hits them emotionally, because it hits them where they are. And if you can't, even though you might not feel a certain emotion, if you constantly consume that genre, then I guarantee you're probably going to start feeling those feelings that you didn't really feel before, whether it's depression or anger or whatever it may be. And every song has a message, and you're consuming that message. And the more you listen to it, you're believing in that message. And so you're going to act upon that message. So I think it's and even when we talked about moving the bar, one comedian actually compared "Baby It's Cold Outside," the Christmas song written in, after World War II, to WAP. And it's like, how are we calling one to be canceled when it's just a song about a lover, being flirtatious, and not calling this to be canceled when it's clearly a very explicit song to be played? So yeah, I think the bar has been moved. I think people are very much desensitized, where they sing the lyrics. I remember even talking to some students as they were singing some songs at church. And I was like, "Oh, what are you guys singing?" It's like, it's. They just stopped when I entered the room. Like, why can't you sing this in front of me? And then as I asked them about it, their response was something along the lines of, well, we don't listen for the lyrics. We listen for the music. I'm like, what is lyrics? Like, if not music? Like, so I think there's that shows to me there's a certain level of desensitization, whatever, the word that you're trying to say. People are desensitized because they know what the words are saying, but they don't really care to pay attention to it while still being affected by it. So I think music's a powerful thing, and it absolutely, I think, affects us like the way that TV shows might affect us too.
All right, I guess I'm the only one that's watched Game of Thrones here. I definitely that the sexual immorality, the perversion drives the show in the beginning, and then it kind of tapers off towards the end. But for sure, it affects you. It's so I like usually. I mean, I like every genre. Like I'll watch anything. And one thing I noticed is I can relate to most of our listeners here in that, if you scroll through like Netflix, there's like categories of like different types of films or genres, maybe timelines, and like I always seem to be attracted to like things in the 90s for some reason. And one thing I notice about like things that I watch is that like let's say you watch something in the 80s, something in the 90s, in a general sense, 2000s, 2010s, 2020s. One thing I did notice is a common thread is there is like this moral degradation that happens, and storylines, I think, for the attempt for novelty have gone the way of perversion. It's the sheer shock factor. And there have been storylines like earlier on, like if you even go further back, like in the 50s and 60s, film in general, I want to say in general, there's always exceptions, but they've always been more wholesome. Like you go to the movies to experience something outside of your life, and then usually there's a happy ending. But now it's like that's not the norm. Now it's just, we do whatever we can to get the views. Do whatever we can to appeal to the audience. And I'm sure there's a correlation between one or the other. But now when you go to see a movie, like, now we're about to hit that the couple months where there's summer blockbusters. Blockbusters now are very different from even like 10 years ago, I would say. And things that are elevated now are very different. So, for example, one thing I was really surprised about was the Academy Awards, and the Best Picture went to it was a film called Honora. Yeah, it's about like a sex worker, and that was glorified to be, this is the best picture out of all these other films. And I just found that really hard to believe. But I also realized I think that's just where our culture is. Like that's how we celebrate these things. And if we as a culture are kind of immersed in that, then yeah, we are desensitized. Then our attitude is, yeah, what is the problem with watching these things? And that's very destructive to your mind and your heart. You guys have said being in that state of numbness is actually worse, I think, and I do agree. As somebody who has been in that state in the past, where you're just watching something and it's like you have no feeling towards it, that's a very dangerous place to be, especially if you are someone who identifies as a Christian. You are to think of things that are heavenly. You are to set your mind on the things above, right? Colossians it says, and the instruction is very explicit in saying you have to put to death, therefore, what's earthly. And the first thing that is mentioned is sexual immorality. And usually when Paul tells you to do something, tells a church to do something in a letter, it's like the church is probably not doing that. They're probably struggling with that. And as Christians, we should be vigilant towards, like you guys have said, watching what we're watching. Like sometimes, like pushing the pause button and asking yourself, what's helpful for me is, pushing the pause button, asking myself, is this really worth 30 minutes of my time? Is this worth an hour, 2 hours of my time? Is it going to help me to think better thoughts about God or other people? And most of it is neutral, but if it's not, then I don't think this is worth my time. I can do better things. But yeah, that's just something I've noticed as time has gone. I don't know. I don't know if media in that sense will be redeemed in the coming years. I feel like it's just going to keep getting worse unless something's said about it. I guess that's why also I don't want to go on too much of a different topic, but like faith-based media has come up, I think, as sort of an alternative that people think that's better. But
Cornerstone Media.
yes,
Pastor Paul has dreams. He has ambitions.
Film
That's
production.
next. We're gonna
Okay.
produce a movie
Next-
together.
Okay,
Next year's
wow.
passion project.
I
Will
didn't,
be
share,
a
I didn't,
full-length
I didn't
movie.
share with Davina yet, guys.
Oh my gosh,
A movie.
that's
my
crazy.
Starting Pastor Siyoung as Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We're going from music video to movie.
The worship project was a training thing. Davina learned a lot through the process. I hear.
So if any of our members have
Crazy.
acting chops, you can fully realize your gifts next summer.
AKA Pastor Jacob. No, thank you. Thanks for you guys' insight there. I kind of want to help people with sort of practically how to navigate this on a day-to-day, right? And so for you guys, the question is, how do we determine what is right and appropriate, right? And so the first context is, how do you determine what's appropriate for your children as parents? How do you determine what is right and appropriate for your children?
Well, I think most of the stuff that's out there, if you have young ones, say under the age of 10, probably shouldn't be watching what you're watching. But I think even what you permit them to watch, you should always have some sort of discussion about it so that they can process rightly in what they're seeing, what they have seen. Like I remember a mom a while ago took her daughters to watch Mean Girls in theaters. This was a long time ago. Not the remake of the musical, but the original one with Lindsay Lohan. And then they had a discussion about it. What was it like when you saw these girls treat the other girls this way, right? And so it was still a learning process, as the art is meant to inspire. What are the ways that we should live? What are the things that you thought these characters did well to help one another? What was the ultimate story that you got, or the lesson that you got out of it? And so I think it's good that you have these discussions, even as I let my kids watch some educational things, or Bluey even.
Yeah,
There are things where we converse. It's like, oh, what were some of the things you liked about these characters? Why was that funny? What was really helpful to you? Why do you want to watch this again? I think it's good that parents get in the practice of dialoguing and helping their children reflect and understand what they've seen. But most of the stuff that parents, want to watch, your little ones probably shouldn't be watching.
I mean, if you're able to have a conversation like that, then great. But I think practically speaking, it's going to be probably not possible to do every time. I think the best advice I can give parents, and I've mentioned this in other episodes or other podcast episodes, is you shouldn't give your kid a smartphone until they're, I believe, in high school, right? So I think that's the best way to filter out all the junk that they will naturally consume if they had a smartphone. And even when you do give them a smartphone, you have to have a filter on it so that they're not downloading anything they want to. And, Caleb's a junior now in high school. Even him, right? He can't just download apps. Recently, he asked for Snapchat. That's what it's called, right? Snapchat. Because his baseball team, his players actually use that app to communicate with each other, right? Not the coaches, but just the players. And he actually missed a meeting, it was like a signing thing with one one senior graduating, and he was an official signing thing because he wasn't part of that Snapchat group, and he wasn't happy about that. But I mean, that's a cost of trying to honor the Lord, right? As parents. But I remember asking you guys, what do you think about Snapchat? And our youngest intern, who was the one who said no way, right? He said don't have him download because it's junk. It's filthier than Instagram, basically, right? And actually, I downloaded it myself to take a look, and it was true. It's a lot more filth, readily accessible through Snapchat than Instagram. It's like, okay, I told him no, right? And he's still somewhat of an obedient kid, so he was fine with it. But he did miss that meeting, right? But that's the cost. So I would say just have a filter and be mindful of what comes through the home. Once they reach a certain age, though, especially once they go off to college, it's going to be much more difficult. And I think at that point, I mean, they're pretty much on their own. But in the meantime, you're responsible for cultivating those values in them, and hopefully, they'll have the wisdom to discern. I mean, of course, they'll make mistakes along the way, but they'll have a foundation at least, right?
Yeah.
I did have something to say actually on this. So it was after church. It was a few younger people. We were having lunch, and then we were just in conversation. And one thing I asked was like, if you go back in time to your 10-year-old self, what would you tell your 10-year-old self or change about your? And then some of them were sharing like, oh, I would like not quit piano, something like that, or I would learn golf, or I would read more. And one response actually stood out to me the most. This person said, I would tell my 10-year-old self not to have a smartphone. And I was like, oh, why? Because this person said that they were given a smartphone at, I think 10 years, you're in 4th grade. And they said, like, I wasn't given any, like, supervision or anything. And, like, and it was just really interesting to hear somebody's perspective looking back and saying that actually wasn't to my benefit. So yeah,
Wow.
hearing a very like real example of somebody regretting that, and I'm sure they can comment on how that affected them to a certain degree, but that response actually stood out to me. So that actually, I thought about that.
In following up to that, I had a student sharing the same kind of discussion about what they regret or what they had hoped to experience. And what this one young sister said in that time was, I wish that my parents were a little more strict on me. So in that, they would have regulated this more, they would have been on top of my consumption a bit more, that they would have been a position of authority over me a bit more. So it's amazing to hear the life lessons that they understand later in life. Hopefully they'll pass that down to the younger generations and their peers.
For sure.
Well, thank you. How about for our listeners? How do you determine what is right and appropriate, like for yourself and for the sake of our listeners, what are some good principles? I know we talked about, a few scattered principles here and there, but just want to consolidate as we wrap up here. What are some good principles to determine what is right or appropriate that we should be watching?
I think one, if you know what you struggle with, avoid those things, flee from such idolatry. You go to imdb.com and there's a parental guide section, tells you what's in there. If you don't know what a movie's about, or if you don't really know much about it, look in there and see what's in it. And if there's certain things that you struggle with, then avoid it. I had a friend who, was scheduled to go watch a movie with other friends. He didn't know what the movie was about, and he decided on the way to check and notice that there were certain explicit materials in there. I was like, guys, I can't see this. And so, it had to change the whole plans. And what was discouraging were, these were Christians, and they were basically belittling their fellow Christian brother for trying to be more like Christ in everything that he consumes. But the resources are out there. And so you can always find out what's there. to make sure you don't run into any surprises. So if you know you struggle with it, avoid it like a plague.
Well, I was going to say one good piece of advice is maybe consume less media, watch less Netflix, watch less TV shows and movies, and maybe even moderate your consumption of music to some degree. Again, we're finite people, only 24 hours a day. Maybe invest more time in people, right? Talking to people, conversing, fellowshipping. That would be a healthy shift in my opinion. But of course, I'm not against music. Again, I'm not against art. I think one thing, just ask a simple question: Would this honor the Lord? Would this please the Lord? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that most of the time would steer you in the right direction. I was thinking about what PJ said earlier regarding how youth students often say, and I've heard this too, said, I'm just listening for the music. And what they mean is everything except the lyrics. I'm not interested in lyrics, just the beat, basically, whatever. And to that I would say, well, I think we're called as Christians to be wiser consumers, and that when we consume something and when we're trying to discern whether this is good or bad, we need to look at the whole package. Yeah. We got to evaluate any kind of art form by being able to dissect, okay, how are the lyrics, first of all, right? What is the message? And you have to think about what the message. You can't just tune it out and say, I'm just listening to this because of the music, quote unquote. That's not being a wise, thoughtful consumer. So my encouragement would be a more thoughtful consumer of the arts. I think that would be much more honoring to the Lord.
If everyone thought that way, which I hope people will, I think we will just have more high quality things coming out.
Yes.
Because we wouldn't be consuming everything that's out
Junk,
there.
yeah.
We'd be very particular in what we consume. So these production companies will understand, okay, we got to really do some high quality stories here for people to consume, not, as the young people call it, brain rot, right? We want to consume things that are worthwhile consuming. So this is not only going to be good for individuals, but this might even revolutionize the industry if people have thought such things. But they also know what they're doing. Netflix and all these apps.
Of course. Yeah.
Sleep is their biggest enemy, apparently.
I'm not trying to endorse K-dramas here, but I think K-dramas basically should, most of them at least, or virtually all of them, I would say 90% of them that are popular, they don't have any gratuitous sex, right? I think it just shows that you don't need to have that element, right, to make something popular or good, right? You can tell a great story, and Pixar is also one example. They're great storytellers within the Pixar sort of, company. You can tell a great story without all this other unnecessary junk, right? And so I just want to encourage people to pursue, those kinds of endeavors.
Well, the K-drama has been pushing boundaries too these days.
I'm sure.
I know there's some series.
Generally speaking.
Yeah. It's more family-oriented, wholesome storylines overall. Along similar lines, I kind of think about, will this edify me and Rebecca as believers? I also think about something we talked about before. It's would it cause any ungodly sort of sinful temptation in me if I watch this? And I love creativity and beauty, but not at the expense of ungodly things popping up and leading me to sin or anything like that. And so, that's why I kind of stick to sci-fi, because sci-fi, some have gratuitous violence, but at least a good chunk of them, I think they're more focused on creating worlds and portraying certain
sand, a lot of sand. And sand,
my headphone popped off because yes, that is the world.
Sandworms.
Arrakis.
Like the main character, the sandworm, that kind of world.
Spies.
That's rude.
Anyway, sorry to cut you off like that.
But yeah, I think I personally tend toward sci-fi. They do tend to have less of the gratuitous things. But just as principles, I think about that. Will this obviously honor the Lord, edify me, my wife, and like build us up as individuals, and would it cause any ungodly sinful temptations, and so I think those are some of the things. I will say though, when it comes to like thrillers and even some horror, I do feel not as strongly about it. Well, it depends on the horror film, but I don't know what you guys.
He's trying to justify his sin now.
No. I don't know how you guys view this, but it's kind of like thrillers, right? Like they keep you like on edge or in suspense, right? And so, obviously with the criteria that we talked about in terms of like gratuitous sex and violence, obviously with the exception of those things, I think there are movies that legitimately like keep you on edge, keep you in suspense. And I personally think that there's not a moral equivalence in that compared to the things that we talked about. Okay. So I kind of liken it to like, we like thrilling things sometimes, like whether it's like roller coaster or like writing certain things that give us that sense of excitement and whatnot, suspense or whatever. And so I personally am like, I don't feel strongly about like being against thrillers, so long as it like kind of meets some of the criteria that I mentioned. I think there's enjoyment in that. And so I don't know what you guys think. Like, and this kind of gets into this last question of genres, right? Are there any particular genres or types of film that we should avoid altogether?
Yeah. Again, I think there are clear lines of things that we should avoid altogether.
Yeah.
But certain genres, I think it's a question of wisdom. I think they can serve as a good illustration, and just explanation of why we need Jesus to be our Lord and Savior. Even as I'm thinking of our youth group students and the things that they consume, particularly like anime or other media where some of these shows are just really dark. But all of them seem to show, whether it's really dark or really fun, there's at least an unexpected savior that come about, or it clearly depicts why we need a savior because this is the world that we live in. So I feel like in some sense there's it serves a purpose to illustrate where words might fail, but clearly displaying what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, what we're seeing in our culture today.
Yeah.
So there is a place, sure, but as we think about perversion and gratuitous violence, I think that's where that horror and thrillers may fall in.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's a wisdom question for some things, but clearly there are certain pictures where we should just avoid altogether.
Yeah. Because I personally like post-apocalyptic movies, right? It's just really like...
Oh, those movies have a lot of sand and dirt too. Not a lot of buildings and green.
Maybe I just like sand. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, it's rough and coarse and gets everywhere.
Yeah, but I sometimes think about like even World War Z, right? That's like a sort of post-apocalyptic movie.
Haven't seen it.
It's like zombies.
Look boring.
It's like...
Is it good? All right.
Rude.
Davina said it's good, so
It's like infections.
I'll give it a try.
It's like zombie infections, essentially.
Oh, zombie.
Yeah.
I'm not a big zombie guy.
Yeah. But my point is I feel like there's not like a clear sort of this is wrong, or there's like a moral equivalency between that and Game of Thrones, right? I do think that some parts are violent, and some could be avoided, but I personally don't feel as strongly about some of those movies as I would like with some of these other things. So that's just my personal thing that it's a wisdom question for sure. And where's the line? It's not always clear, but some things I feel very strongly on and clear on. Some other things I'm inclined to be a little bit more take a backseat. So
I haven't really put that much thought into it, so I guess I'll temper my comments here. But I do think, I mean, I don't consume horror or thriller movies as much. I try to avoid them actually, because I think they do have a negative effect upon me. I think it tends to diminish the seriousness of the like the spiritual evil, perhaps that we see that is present in the world. And I think of passages like Old Testament teaching where it says we should not have anything to do with sorcery, witchcraft, that sort of thing, divination, and I tend to avoid movies that try to depict that in such graphic detail, right?
Yeah.
I think the most you really get out of it is that thrill, being on the edge of your seat and having a jump scare moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't see much of a value in it. That's why I tend to avoid it, but I'm not going to comment any further. If Siyoung said it's okay, then it must be okay.
That's my personal opinion.
Well, some of the best questions that arise from these movies is, who's the real monster? Is it the monster that's going around, or is it something else? And so it's a commentary, right? It's a commentary on society. It's a commentary on our culture. So
and sometimes the demons get exorcised by in the name of Jesus. So
again, I haven't put much thought into it, so I guess
they get defeated.
Of course, every genre is going to have some element of good in it. So I'm not going to argue against that.
Any thoughts there, Andrew? In closing,
I jump on a similar train you do. I do enjoy thriller. I do enjoy the genre. I like any genre, so I do. I can enjoy. I think the thing I enjoy about horror is that the storyline can be really good, and they do keep you on the edge of your seat. Actually, in the first Conjuring, everything gets resolved, and at the end there is a short blurb about these things are real. You should believe in God. So I appreciate that encouragement. Why are you guys laughing? What?
Sounds like a cheap trick to me.
So I don't know if that's a redeeming aspect, but I just appreciated that. That was the one unique thing about all the horror I've seen. But yeah, I mean, it gives me thought to pause and consider, right? It like what are the things I can be more wise in consuming. Earlier we asked about like practical things, and I do understand that most of us, we lead busy lives, tiresome, and at the end of the day, you do want to unwind in a sense, and
play chess.
Play chess, yeah. But I think there is a fine line between unwinding and consuming things that are good, as opposed to just vegging out and consuming things very passively. I do notice that a lot of people watch things just in the background, and I understand that. I understand that fully, but it's like you're never giving your full attention to something when you're doing that. I think people overestimate their ability to multitask. And so for instance, especially on the road, people are just, I think they're watching shows as they're driving.
No wonder there's so many accidents on the road these days.
They're legitimately with two hands texting and looking down, and I'm just how is this happening?
We need self-driving cars.
At this point,
or people should just stop doing.
Oh yeah, that might be worse.
That's probably better.
Yeah, but I mean, seeing that in general, I did screenshot one time this political cartoon, and basically it's like a flood of people, and they're all on their phones, and then off to the side there's two robots that are reading and drawing.
As you're driving, you screenshotted?
No.
Got him.
I did not, no.
Crop.
But I thought that was pretty insightful in that's kind of, it's funny how AI art has become this huge thing where it's why don't you just create it? And we've become a society that just consumes nonstop. And if we are simply Pastor Paul, you mentioned earlier, but if we're constantly consuming, I don't think that's to our benefit. It's like you're always eating. You're eating,
Yeah.
but you're not exercising.
Let's produce some things, guys.
Yeah.
Cornerstone Media.
Okay.
Here we come.
If we say it enough, it might actually
I know.
happen.
26.
Yeah.
I'm scared. Thank you guys for thank you guys for all your insight, wisdom shared today. Hopefully, our listeners will have found this episode helpful in discerning what to watch. As we come to the end of this episode of Living Stones, we hope that our discussion today was helpful in discerning what to watch as believers, all for the glory of our God. If you found value in today's episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Remember that you are not alone in this journey. We are members of God's household, united by a shared faith in the Lord and the desire to grow together. So until next time, may God's grace and peace be with you all. Thank you for being a part of Living Stones.